Racism. The belief in the inherent superiority of one race over all others and thereby the right to dominance, manifest and implied. Women respond to racism. My response to racism is anger. I have lived with that anger, on that anger, beneath that anger, on top of that anger, ignoring that anger, feeding upon that anger, and learning to use that anger before I laid my visions to waste for most of my life. Once I did it in silence, afraid of the weight of that anger. My fear of that anger taught me nothing. Your fear of that anger will teach you nothing also.
PSA that is really a response to the number of people that I see saying, not all white people are racist. And this is white people as well as black people that love to say this. And I'm just here to let you know, public service announcement, yes, all white people. All white people are racist. And the reason why all white people are racist is because all white people are born into and raised in a racist white supremacist society that instills racist white supremacist ideals within them.
That's right. Sorin is able to decide that every single white person in the world is racist. She knows before ever meeting or interacting with any of these white people that they've all been raised in a racist society, and without meeting these people or interacting with them is able to decide that these people have knowledge that needs to be unlearned. Sorin, is there a possibility that perhaps you're the one that's displaying?
Women responding to racism means women responding to anger. The anger of exclusion, of unquestioned privilege, of racial distortions, of silence, ill use, stereotyping, defensiveness, misnaming, betrayal, and co-opting. My anger is a response to racist attitudes, to the actions and presumptions that arise out of those attitudes. If in your dealings with other women, your actions have reflected those attitudes, then my anger and your attendant fears, perhaps, are spotlights that can be used for your growth, the same way I have had to use learning to express my anger for my growth. But for corrective surgery, not guilt. Guilt and defensiveness are bricks in a wall against which we all will perish, for they serve none of our futures.
The right thing to do, that's dishonest, and it's cult-like. But aside from that, it's not helpful. The best way to change someone's mind, someone who is racist or homophobic or has racist or homophobic tendencies, is not to call them racist or homophobic, but to engage with them on a friendly, human level. Like the wonderful Daryl Davis, who literally befriends KKK members, like the racist of the racists, and even collects their hoods.
For example, I speak out of a direct and particular anger at a particular academic conference, and a white woman comes up and says, "Tell me how you feel, but don't say it too harshly, or I cannot hear you." But is it my manner that keeps her from hearing, or the message that her life may change? After 15 years of a women's movement which professes to address the life concerns and possible futures of all women, I still hear, on campus after campus, how can we address the issues of racism? No women of color attended. Or on the other side of that statement, we have no one in our department equipped to teach their work. In other words, racism is a black women's problem, a problem of women of color, and only we can discuss it. At an international cultural gathering of women, a well-known white American woman poet interrupts the reading of the work of a woman of color to read her own poem, then dashes off to an important panel. Do women in the academy truly want a dialogue about racism? It will require recognizing the needs and the living context of other women. When an academic woman says, for instance, "I can't afford it," she may mean she is making a choice about how to spend her available money. But when a woman on welfare says, "I can't afford it," she means she's surviving on an amount of money that was barely subsistence in 1972, and she often does not have enough to eat. Yet the National Women's Studies Association here in 1981 holds a convention in which it commits itself to responding to racism, yet refuses to waive the registration fee for poor women and women of color who wish to present and conduct workshops. This has made it impossible for many women of color, for instance, Wilmette Brown, of Black Women for Wages for Housework, to participate in this convention. So I ask again, Is this to be merely another situation of the academy, discussing life within the closed circuits of the academy? To all the white women here who recognize these attitudes as familiar, but most of all, to all my sisters of color who live and survive thousands of such encounters, to my sisters of color who, like me, still tremble their rage under harness, or who sometimes question the expression of our rage as useless and disruptive, the two most popular accusations, I want to speak about anger, my anger, and what I've learned from my travels through its dominions. Every woman has a well-stocked arsenal of anger potentially useful against those oppressions, personal and institutional, which brought that anger into being. Focused with precision, it can become a powerful source of energy, serving progress and change. And when I speak of change, I do not mean a simple switch of positions or a temporary lessening of tensions, nor the ability to smile or feel good. I am speaking of a basic and radical alteration in all those assumptions underlying our lives. I have seen situations where white women hear a racist remark, resent what has been said, become filled with fury, and remain silent because they are afraid. That unexpressed anger lies within them like an undetonated device, but anger expressed and translated into action in the service of our vision and our future is a liberating and strengthening act of clarification, for it is in the painful process of this translation that we identify who are our allies, with whom we have grave differences, and who are our genuine enemies. Anger is loaded with information and energy. When I speak of women of color, I do not only mean black women. We are also Asian American, Caribbean, Chicana, Latina, Hispanic, Native American, and we have a right to each of our names. The woman of color who charges me with rendering her invisible by assuming that her struggles with racism are identical with my own has something to tell me that I had better learn from, lest we both waste ourselves fighting the truth between us. If I participate, knowingly or otherwise, in my sister's oppression and she calls me on it, to answer her anger with my own only blankets the substance of our exchange with reaction. It wastes energy I need to join with her, and yes, it is very difficult to stand still and listen to another woman's voice delineate an agony I do not share, or even one in which I myself may have participated. We speak in this place removed from the more blatant reminders of our embattlement as women. This need not blind us to the size and complexities of the forces mounting against us, and all that is most human within our environment. We are not here as women examining racism in a political and social vacuum. We operate in the teeth of a system for whom racism and sexism are primary, established, and necessary props of profit. Women responding to racism is a topic so dangerous that when the local media attempt to discredit this convention, they choose to focus on the provision of lesbian housing as a diversionary device, as if the Hartford Courant dare not mention the topic chosen for discussion here, racism, lest it become apparent that women are in fact attempting to examine and to alter all the repressive conditions of our lives. Mainstream communication does not want women, particularly white women, responding to racism. It wants racism to be accepted as an immutable given in the fabric of existence, like evening time or the common cold.
Big picture and be parsimonious. You even have to be willing to work with racists and unpleasant means for the greater good. Like 100 years ago during the first Women's March on Washington, when black women had to march in the back. Letting them march anywhere, of course, would have been the just thing to do, but given the racist climate of the time, this would have undermined the entire movement from the perspective of the racist majority. The ends, achieving suffrage, justified the means, marginalizing black women.
So we are working in a context of opposition and threat, the cause of which is certainly not the angers which lie between us, but rather that virulent hatred leveled against all women, people of color, lesbians and gay men, poor people, against all of us who are seeking to examine the particulars of our lives as we resist our oppressions, moving toward coalition and effective action. Any discussion among women about racism must include the recognition and use of anger. It must be direct and creative because it is crucial. We cannot allow our fear of anger to deflect us nor to seduce us into settling for anything less than the hard work of excavating honesty. We must be quite serious about the choice of this topic and the angers entwined within it, because rest assured, our opponents are quite serious about their hatred of us and what we are trying to do here. This hatred and our anger are very different. Hatred is the fury of those who do not share our goals, and its object is death and destruction. Anger is the grief of distortions between peers, and its object is change. But our time is getting shorter. We've been raised to view any difference other than sex as a reason for destruction, and for black women and white women to face each other's angers without denial or immobilization or silence or guilt is in itself a heretical and generative idea. It implies peers meeting upon a common basis is to examine difference and to alter those distortions which history has created around difference. For it is those distortions which separate us, and we must ask ourselves, who profits from all this? Women of color in America have grown up within a symphony of anguish at being silenced, at being unchosen, at knowing that when we survive, it is in spite of a whole world out there that takes for granted our lack of humanness, that hates our very existence outside of its service. And I say symphony rather than cacophony because we have had to learn to orchestrate these furies so they do not tear us apart. We've had to learn to move through them and use them for strength and force and insight within our daily lives. Those of us who did not learn this difficult lesson did not survive, and part of my anger is always libation for my fallen sisters. Anger is an appropriate reaction to racist attitudes, as is fury when the actions arising from those attitudes do not change. To those women in here who fear the anger of women of color more than their own unscrutinized racist attitudes, I ask, is our anger more threatening than the woman hatred that tinges all the aspects of our lives? It is not the anger of other women that will destroy us, but our refusal to stand still, to listen to its rhythms, to learn within it, to move beyond the manner of presentation to the substance, to tap that anger as an important source of empowerment. I cannot hide my anger to spare you guilt, nor hurt feelings, nor answering anger, for to do so insults and trivializes all our efforts. Guilt is not a response to anger, it is a response to one's own actions or lack of action. If it leads to change, it can be useful, since it becomes no longer guilt but the beginning of knowledge. Yet, all too often, guilt is just another name for impotence, for defensiveness destructive of communication. It becomes a device to protect ignorance and the continuation of things the way they are, the ultimate protection for changelessness. I have no creative use for guilt, yours or my own. Guilt is only another way of avoiding informed action, of buying time out of the pressing need to make clear choices, out of the approaching storm that can feed the earth as well as bend the trees. If I speak to you in anger, at least I have spoken to you. I have not put a gun to your head and shot you down in the street. I have not looked at your bleeding sister's body and asked, what did she do to deserve it? The angers between women will not kill us if we can articulate them with precision, if we can listen to the content of what is said with at least as much intensity as we defend ourselves from the manner of saying. Anger is a source of empowerment we must not fear to tap for energy rather than guilt. When we turn from anger, or we turn from insight, saying we will accept only the designs already known, those deadly and safely familiar. I have tried to learn my anger's usefulness to me as well as its limitations. For women raised to fear, too often anger threatens annihilation. In the male construct of brute force, we are taught that our lives depended on the goodwill of patriarchal power. The anger of others was to be avoided at all costs, because there was nothing to be learned from it but pain, a judgment that we had been bad girls, come up lacking, not done what we were supposed to. And if we accept our powerlessness, then of course anger can destroy us. But the strength of women lies in recognizing differences between us as creative, and in standing to those distortions which we inherited without blame, but which are ours to alter. The angers of women can transform differences through insight into power. For anger between peers births change, not destruction, and the discomfort and sense of loss it causes is not fatal, but a sign of growth. My response to racism is anger. That anger has eaten clefts into my living when it remained unspoken, useless to anyone. It has also served me in classrooms without light or learning, where the work and history of black women was less than a vapor. It served me as fire in the ice zone of uncomprehending eyes of white women who see in my experience and the experience of my people only new reasons for fear or guilt. And my anger is no excuse for not dealing with your blindness. No reason to withdraw from the results of your own actions. When women of color speak out of the anger that laces so many of our contacts with white women, we are often told that we are creating a mood of hopelessness, preventing white women from getting past guilt, or standing in the way of trusting communication in an action. All of these quotes come directly from letters to me from members of this organization within the last 2 years. One woman wrote, "Because you are black and lesbian, you seem to speak with the moral authority of suffering. Yes, I am black and lesbian, and what you hear in my voice is fury, not suffering, anger, not moral authority. There's a difference." To turn aside from the anger of black women with excuses or the pretexts of intimidation is to award no one with power. It is merely another way of preserving racial blindness, the power of unaddressed privilege, unbreached, intact. For guilt is only yet another form of objectification. Oppressed peoples are always being asked to stretch a little more to bridge the gap between blindness and humanity. Black women are expected to use our anger only in the service of other people's salvation, other people's learning. But that time is over. My anger has meant pain to me, but it has also meant survival. And before I give it up, I'm going to be sure that there is something at least as powerful to replace it on the road to clarity. What woman here is so enamored of her own oppression, her own oppressed status, that she cannot see her heel print upon another woman's face? What woman's terms of oppression have become so precious and necessary as a ticket into the fold of the righteous, away from the cold winds of self-scrutiny? I am a lesbian woman of color whose children eat regularly because I work in a university. If their full bellies make me fail to recognize my own commonality with a woman of color whose children do not eat because she cannot find work, or who has no children because her insides are rotted from home abortions and sterilization, if I fail to recognize the lesbian who chooses not to have children, the woman who remains closeted because her homophobic community is her only life support, the woman who chooses silence instead of another death, the woman who is terrified lest my anger trigger the explosion of hers, if I fail to recognize them as other faces of myself, then I am contributing not only to each of their oppressions, but also to my own. And the anger which stands between us then must be used for clarity and mutual empowerment, now for evasion by guilt or for further separation. I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. And I am not free as long as one person of color remains chained, nor is any one of you. I speak here as a woman of color who is not bent upon destruction, but upon survival. No woman is responsible for altering the psyche of her oppressor, even when that psyche is embodied in another woman. I have suckled the wolf's lip of anger, and I've used it for illumination, laughter, protection, fire in places where there was no light, no food, no sisters, no quarter. We are not goddesses or matriarchs or edifices of divine forgiveness. We are not fiery fingers of judgment or instruments of flagellation. We are women who when always forced back on our women's power. We have learned to use anger as we have learned to use the dead flesh of animals, and bruised, battered, and changing. We have survived and grown, and in Angela Wilson's words, we are moving on. With or without uncolored women, we use whatever strengths we have fought for, including anger, to help define and fashion a world where all our sisters can grow, where our children can love, and where the power of touching and meeting other women's difference and wonder will eventually transcend the need for destruction. For it is not the anger of black women which is dripping down over this globe like a diseased liquid. It is not my anger that launches rockets, spends over $60,000 a second on missiles, and the other agents of war and death, pushes opera singers off rooftops, slaughters children in cities, stockpiles nerve gas and chemical bombs, sodomizes our daughters and our earth. It is not the anger of black women which corrodes into blind, dehumanizing power, bent upon the annihilation of all of us, until we meet it with what we have, our power to examine, to redefine the terms upon which we will live and work, our power to envision and to reconstruct anger by painful anger, stone upon heavy stone, a future of pollinating difference and the earth to support our changes. We welcome all women who can meet us face to face, beyond objectification, and beyond guilt. My name is Ashley. Thank you for watching.